This aircraft doesn't fire missiles. It doesn't drop bombs. It doesn't even have real weapons. And yet, Russia's most advanced fighter jets are falling out of the sky because of it. No warning, no dogfight, just a sudden strike, and it's over. Because somewhere above the battlefield, an invisible eye is watching everything, tracking every movement, predicting every move, and turning hunters into targets. The scariest part? Most pilots don't even realize they've been seen until it's too late. And what's happening right now could completely change how this war is fought.
When Sweden announced it was sending this aircraft to Ukraine, almost no one paid attention. No headlines about unstoppable firepower, no talk of game-changing weapons, just a surveillance plane. On paper, it looked underwhelming, almost useless in a war dominated by missiles, tanks, and fighter jets. And for months, it stayed that way. Nothing dramatic, no sudden impact, just silence. Behind that silence, crews were being trained, systems were being prepared, infrastructure was being quietly built from the ground up. To most observers, it felt slow, maybe even irrelevant. Because how much difference could one aircraft really make? But that was the mistake. Because this wasn't about adding more weapons to the battlefield. It was about changing how the entire battlefield works. And the moment this aircraft finally entered the skies, everything started to shift. But Russia wouldn't realize that until it walked straight into it.
Then came the moment that changed everything. A Russian Su-35 lifted off, moving fast to intercept Ukrainian aircraft near the front lines. From the pilot's perspective, it was a standard mission. Engage, control the airspace, push the enemy back. The jet was one of Russia's best, fast, powerful, built to dominate. There was no reason to expect anything unusual. But what the pilot didn't know was that he had already been seen, long before he got anywhere near the battlefield. High above, far out of sight, something was tracking him from hundreds of miles away. Every turn, every adjustment, watched in real time. And that information wasn't just being collected, it was being sent directly to Ukrainian fighters already in position, waiting. Not searching, not reacting, waiting. Because this wasn't going to be a fight. It was going to be an ambush. And the moment the Su-35 moved into range, a Ukrainian F-16 pilot, already prepared.
Because what made that ambush possible wasn't the missile, it was the system behind it. The aircraft guiding everything from above. At first glance, it looks ordinary, almost like a small passenger plane. But inside, it's something completely different. A flying command center. A radar system in the sky that sees everything happening below in real time. While ground radars struggle with obstacles, hills, buildings, even the curvature of the Earth, this aircraft operates high above it all. Nothing blocks its view. And that gives it a massive advantage. It can track hundreds of targets at once. Jets moving at high speed, drones flying low to avoid detection, missiles cutting across the sky, even activity on the ground. Before this, Ukraine was working with fragments, different systems picking up bits and pieces of information, delayed signals, incomplete pictures. Commanders had to react to what already happened. Now, they're seeing everything as it unfolds. Movements aren't surprises anymore. They're patterns. Predicted, tracked, understood. And that changes the entire pace of the battlefield. Because when you stop reacting and start anticipating, you don't just defend yourself. You control what happens next. And for Russia,
That's where the real problem begins. For most of the war, Russia had a reliable advantage. Stay low, stay fast, stay hidden. Pilots used terrain to their advantage, flying beneath radar coverage, slipping behind hills, forests, and even entire cities. It made detection difficult, sometimes impossible until the last moment. That gave them time to strike and escape before Ukraine could react. And for a long time, it worked. But this aircraft changes that completely. Because from high above, there's nowhere to hide. No terrain to block the view. No altitude low enough to stay invisible. Everything below becomes exposed. Movements that once went unnoticed are now tracked from miles away. Approaches that used to be safe are now predictable. And suddenly, the tactics Russia depended on stop working. Pilots can no longer rely on stealth or timing to stay safe, because the moment they move, they're seen. And once they're seen, they're already at risk. But what this does next create...
That weapon is glide bombs. Heavy, precise, and incredibly destructive. Instead of flying directly over dangerous front lines, Russian jets can release these bombs from a distance. Once dropped, they glide silently toward their targets, guided with surprising accuracy. And by the time they're detected, it's already too late. Defenses don't have enough time to react. Troops don't have time to reposition. The damage is already on the way. These bombs have been one of Russia's most effective tools throughout the war. They flattened positions, destroyed fortifications, and forced Ukraine into constant retreat in some areas. The real problem wasn't stopping the bombs themselves. It was stopping the aircraft carrying them, because those jets stayed far enough away to remain safe, hidden, protected, untouchable. Ukraine often knew an attack had happened, but not soon enough to prevent it. And that delay made all the difference. Because once the bombs were released, the outcome was almost guaranteed. But now, that advantage is starting to disappear.
Now, with this aircraft in the sky, the game changes before the bombs are ever released. Because Ukraine doesn't just see the impact anymore, it sees the setup. Far in the distance, long before Russian jets reach their launch points, they're already being tracked. Their routes mapped out, their speed calculated, their intentions predicted. And that early warning creates something Ukraine never had before. Time. Time to move fighters into position. Time to activate air defenses. Time to prepare a response before the attack even begins. But sometimes, they don't even need to fire, because just being seen is enough. Russian pilots now have to assume they're being watched every second they're in the air. That changes how they fly. They hesitate, they adjust, they second-guess their approach. And under that pressure, they're forced to release bombs earlier, from farther away, at worse angles, which means less accuracy, less impact, more wasted strikes, and more mistakes. Because when you're not sure if you've already been targeted, every decision becomes harder. Every move becomes riskier. And in a war where seconds matter, that hesitation can change everything. But even with this advantage, there's a serious weakness that could still shift the balance.
Because for all its power, this system comes with a critical limitation. Ukraine only has a couple of these aircraft, just 2. And in a war this large, that's a massive constraint. They can't be everywhere at once. They can't provide constant coverage across the entire battlefield. Every mission has to be carefully planned. Every flight has to be protected. Because if one of these aircraft is lost, the impact would be immediate. That single eye in the sky would be gone, and replacing it wouldn't be quick. So they're forced to operate with caution, keeping them far from the most dangerous zones, rotating their positions, never leaving them exposed for too long. There's also another issue. Not all systems are fully connected. In modern warfare, the real power comes from shared data networks, where aircraft, ground units, and air defenses all see the same battlefield in real time. But if that connection is limited or incomplete, then even the best radar in the sky can't reach its full potential. It becomes powerful, but not fully integrated. Still, even with these limits, its presence alone changes the battlefield. Because Russia now has to assume it's always being watched, and that alone forces them to fight differently. But what comes next could push this even further.
Because this is only the beginning. If these aircraft become fully integrated with Ukraine's fighter jets, everything scales up. F-16s reacting instantly to radar data, air defenses responding in real time, targets identified and tracked the moment they appear. No delays, no gaps, no guessing. Just a single connected battlefield where every unit shares the same picture at the same time. And if that happens, Russia's current advantages start to shrink even further. Because speed becomes everything. Whoever reacts first wins. And there's another layer coming too. Future aircraft like Sweden's Gripen fighters could join this network, making it even more flexible, more responsive, and harder to counter. That turns this from a simple surveillance upgrade into a full combat system. One that doesn't just observe the battlefield, but actively shapes it. And that's the real shift here. This isn't about a single aircraft changing the war. It's about a new kind of warfare entirely, where seeing the enemy first isn't just helpful, it's decisive. And in that kind of battlefield, the side with the clearest vision doesn't just survive, it dominates.